the takeover of America.
And then the world itself, by any means necessary, however violent, or cruel, or efficient. By severe drought, brought on by weather wars, conducted secretly using aerial contaminants and high-altitude electromagnetic waves. In a state of perpetual war. To create problem, reaction, solution scenarios to distract, enrage, and enslave American citizens at home. By severe drought, brought on by weather wars, conducted secretly using aerial contaminants and high-altitude electromagnetic waves. By severe drought.
Υπάρχει νερό αυτή τη στιγμή το οποίο είναι ευεργετικό βιολογικά για τον άνθρωπο. Το δεύτερο ψέμα είναι ότι υπάρχει μηχάνημα που κινεί πολύ μεγάλα οχήματα και λειτουργεί με νερό. Το τρίτο ψέμα είναι ότι υπάρχουν μεγάλες μηχανές που κινούνται με νερό. Η διαδικασία είναι απλή, το υδρογόνο είναι, τίποτα άλλο. Ναι. Κινούνται με νερό λοιπόν, με σχεδόν μηδαμινό κόστος, ίσως ανύπαρκτο κόστος περισσότερες φορές. Ένα άλλο ψέμα είναι ότι υπάρχει ένα όπλο το οποίο μπορεί να διαλύσει ολόκληρη την Ήπειρο, λειτουργεί με βάση το νερό. Ένα άλλο ψέμα είναι ότι η θάλασσα του Αιγαίου μπορεί να γίνει σεντόνι και να τους πλακώσει. Σηκώνουμε δηλαδή ένα παλιριακό κύμα και το κατευθύνουμε όπου θέλουμε. Είναι ψέμα και αυτό. Ένα άλλο ψέμα είναι ότι υπάρχει ουσία στο νερό, όπως κάποιος έδιωξε το ηλεκτρόνιο το τελευταίο, έχει αφαιρεθεί και αυτή η ουσία. Που μπήκε αυτή η ουσία από Ιάπωνες επιστήμονες μέσα στο νερό και σταμάτησαν λοιπόν τα κύτταρα του ανθρώπου να γερνούν. Επιβράδυνε τη διαδικασία. Την έχει επιβραδύνει πολύ από την καθημερινή μας.
Ναι, αυτά είναι τα ψέματα όμως.
Ψέματα είναι όλα αυτά. Αυτά εδώ που ακούτε τώρα είναι ψέματα. Υπάρχουν οπλικά συστήματα που δουλεύουν με το νερό. Είναι ψέμα και αυτό.
Ναι. Έτσι. Να πω εγώ τώρα αλήθειες. Να πω εγώ μερικές αλήθειες. Αφού αυτά είναι ψέματα, να πω εγώ τώρα αλήθειες. Λοιπόν, όλα όσα κάνει ο ΟΗΕ για όλη την ανθρωπότητα είναι για το καλό των ανθρώπων. Το ΝΑΤΟ υπάρχει προς όφελος του ελληνισμού σε όλο τον κόσμο. Αυτή τη στιγμή όλα τα φάρμακα είναι σίγουρο ότι μόνο καλό μας κάνουν. Το νερό της σύντρευσης στη Θεσσαλονίκη και στην Αθήνα μπορείς άφοβα να το δίνεις στο μωρό σου, να κάνεις γάλα. Και όλα γίνονται για το καλό της ανθρωπότητας. Τα δάνεια δόθηκαν στους ανθρώπους μόνο και μόνο για να ανεβάσουν το βιωτικό τους επίπεδο. Εσύ λοιπόν έλεγες ψέματα και εγώ έλεγα αλήθεια.
I mean, lasers? Really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops? And if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine.
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes. All of them could be subject to weather modification.
Watching the actual live tracking of Hurricane Ian as it entered the kind of the southwestern shoreline of Florida, and then it moved in, and then it stopped, and then it took a turn to the east, like a sharp turn, like it had a turn signal on or something, and then it stopped, and then it hovered, and then it moved around, and then it decided to go north. This is not natural looking.
We'll send you the link to the recordings of the frequency transmissions that are used to repel the storm in different directions. That's how it's steered. And we have the actual recordings of that in real time while it's happening, maneuvering that storm. Same thing happens with so many other storms, Mike. They can't know things like that unless that is actually the scheduled weather, unless they have the means to actually manipulate the storms, and they do. And Mike, if you didn't see it, in the case of Hurricane Ian, it was just a drifting mass of unorganized convection, and that makes the storms much easier for them to steer until it gets closer to the land-based transmitters. And then with ionosphere heaters, they can affect the convection that allows the storm to start forming and strengthening, which it did. That transmitter, again, with the repelling effect, when they saturate the air mass full of electrically conductive particles, that's part of climate engineering, those particles can be moved and repelled by the transmissions, and they can, in this way, maneuver those storms, steer them where they want to go. They de-energize the transmitters on the side that they want the storm to migrate to, so they're not being repelled.
So they can, in essence, freeze the movement of the storm and just let it hover and sit over a certain area while it's dropping, 2 feet of rain. Like they can do that.
Exactly.
So one of the things that just popped up with this hurricane is that it was a direct hit, and it hovered over the area of Central Florida that is used by a company called Mosaic, which is responsible for producing 50% of the pelletized phosphate fertilizer for all of North America, and they provide 12% of the phosphate fertilizers for the entire world. So if you wanted to destroy the crop supply, folks, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So nitrogen you shut down by shutting down pipelines in Europe and Russia, and then phosphate is what's being shut down now by this hurricane in Florida.
Other ways that they are able to shut down crops, for example, on the West Coast, these desiccant particles are so effective at drying out atmospheric RH, atmospheric relative humidity, that all the fertilizer in the world here on the West Coast wouldn't make any difference.
The civilian infrastructure that keeps people alive is being targeted by weaponization of the weather system. This is hitting people for mass starvation, famine, dislocation. What is your prognosis for the food supply in 2023 and a couple of years beyond that, just based on the fertilizer disruptions that we've already talked about here, plus the drought and the geoengineering attacks on the biosphere?
Mass starvation. Line is we need to stop interfering with the planet's life support systems. Climate engineering, the single most destructive human activity of all short of nuclear cataclysm, and we have an entire system of academia pretending it's not happening.